It's my great pleasure indeed to welcome Stephen Batchelor into a discussion on his great good work on Buddhism. Uh, that work has been seminal in my own personal life. I was taken with Buddhism without beliefs way back, and I actually went to the talk. I called it the debate, but Thurman says it wasn't. The debates that occurred between Bob Thurman and Stephen, as Stephen was articulating a new position. And Stephen's work really comes out of the difficulty many of us encounter as Westerners attempting to practice Buddhism, the catch between following the teacher who represents the Buddha and is therefore given to be the Dharma leader and the person of perfect truths. So on the one hand, there's the admonition to follow the teacher as the representative of the Buddha. On the other side is the rational heart of Buddhism, which says examine everything, look into everything, be rationally inclined to not take things at face value, but to penetrate into them, which in a lot of ways coincides with the views of there not being intrinsic reality and that all things are form and need to be examined as form to get to their heart. So the great conflict that many of us have had, that Stephen has been, I think, the leader in taking on the task of clarification and examination, has been what are the absolute truths, if any, that exists amongst the claims of the various schools of Buddhism versus what do we perceive to be our own view based on examination. The great questions, of course, are centered on things like reincarnation and dependent origination, which form core belief systems within Mahayana Buddhism. For me, as a Vajrayana Buddhist, which Stephen has a background in quite deeply early on as a monk and afterwards, the core beliefs that Buddha nature is absolute, transcends time and space, no matter what, which is a lovely concept because really it goes to the heart of some things we're doing, like Indra's net, in the sense that consciousness has at its core the ability to provide a life of justice when under guidance and tolerance and all the things that we need now, and that everyone has that inside. So one of the great questions you can't prove really is, does everyone have it inside? We have some doubts about a variety of human beings as to whether they have it inside and whether it's accessible. You know, we look at Hitler, but now we have a bunch of other cronies of Hitler emerging who we wonder where it is. If they have Buddha nature, it's so dormant, it's under some giant boulder, we can't find it. How do we arouse it? And we all pray for their realization, because realization is the best way out of criminality, as we know. So all of that goes to say that the exploration that Stephen has begun has been formidable in my life, because I've always had difficulty with things like reincarnation. I couldn't find it. I lost a child early on, a long time ago, my oldest son, and you know, I looked for reincarnation. I looked for where he could come back. Somebody of consequence said, oh, he arose over here, but you'll never get to know him. And, you know, there's all this stuff us humans create out of wishful thinking and desire for a sense of continuity and immortality. So Stephen's two latest books, which are part of the subject of today's discourse, if I ever let him get to talk, is this remarkable book, After Buddhism, which I have been sending to all my friends, which is, I think, the height of your work the most profound way into the Dharma and into this historical reconstruction of the Buddha's life as a way of life that's been done, and the most solid of the works you've done, though I love Confessions of a Buddhist Atheist. And then we have this coming out book, which I like a lot, which has just been published, called The Art of Solitude. You have a way of getting short titles. You got these great short titles. After Buddhism, everyone wonders what comes after Buddhism. And then The Art of Solitude and everything. One thinks, well, solitude is, loneliness and abandonment and horror. And you make a wonderful case for the merits of solitude. So just to bring us in and to then get rid of me, I just want to read what I think is an entry into the heart of what Stephen is trying to elucidate. It comes out of The Art of Buddhism. So pardon my reading. On the basis of what we know about the awakening from the Noble Quest, which is one of the sutras, Gautama's, that's the Buddha, historical Buddha, Gautama's primary challenge as a teacher would have been to translate his vision of the Dharma as a twofold ground, meaning arising and cessation, into the practice of the Dharma as a way of life, which I think is the core of what you're trying for. He had to convert an insight about conditioned arising and nirvana into an ethical, contemplative, and philosophical discipline. He had to shape something that was private, intuitive, and inchoate into a form that was accessible to others, carefully reasoned and pragmatically structured. My hypothesis is that at some point he came to conceive of the twofold ground as a fourfold task. In classical terminology, the fourfold task is this: suffering, or dukkha, is to be comprehended. 2, the arising is to be let go of. The ceasing is to be beheld. The path is to be cultivated. And then Stephen goes on to help us, because he's a very helpful soul, to try and get us to think about how we might think of such things in our own terminology. In more colloquial language, the task can be summarized as a set of instructions: embrace life, let go of what arises, see it ceasing, and then the imperative, act. So I want to begin with that, and apologize again for my long introduction, and bring you into discourse. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you. So, are you going to start this, or do you want me just to respond to what you're saying?
Yeah, why don't you take us a little deeper into it? I mean, you've made this a task of your life. The After Buddhism is a continuation of your exploration of what we can reconstruct of the Buddha's life, not for the arbitrary state of achieving historiography, but because you are looking at the Buddha in an ecological format. You are situating the Buddha in time, place, and really the ambience and ecology, the political structure of his times, and the human conflicts that arose. And you in this book, the history you delineate is so full of awareness of the Buddha's struggles with people, occasionally what seems to be loss of temper. You know, the Buddha as a real hombre, as a real guy in the world, trying to figure this out. So he comes down from the Pure Lands into the life of what is it to live an ethical life? How do we even conceive of such a thing? What are the balance points between people, which is so relevant to what we're trying to do today? And so maybe that's a place to begin in the face of our suffering and confusion.
Yes, well, you summarized it all very well, Phil. And as you were reading the passage from After Buddhism, which I dimly remembered writing, It also struck me that my language has moved on a bit. And I think it's important for anyone who's been following my work to recognize that it is a work in progress. It's still a work in progress. And despite all of the very kind things Phil said about my magnum opus after Buddhism, I don't see it like that. I see it as just another stage on the way. And one of the things that's come out of this COVID-19 experience that we're still going through is that it's given me an unexpected opportunity for the last 4 or 5 months now to embark on another book project, which I probably wouldn't have done had I not been in lockdown. I would have been too busy traveling here, teaching there, meetings, and I probably wouldn't have written much at all in the last 4 or 5 months. As it is, I've nearly half finished another book, which is called The Ethics of Uncertainty. And in many ways, I see it as the sequel to After Buddhism. It takes up where After Buddhism left off. It's not as minutely researched. It doesn't go in very much at all to the history of Buddhism. It doesn't mention much about the historical figure Gautama. But it's really an attempt to articulate without apology, without having to justify and explain myself in terms of classical Buddhism, how I envisage the Dharma as a practice for human beings to engage with in the kind of world we live in now. And my conviction increasingly becomes that of seeing the Dharma as essentially a system of ethics, a practical philosophy perhaps, a system of ethics certainly. In other words, if we take ethics in the broadest sense, not just as a synonym for morality, but as the Greeks understood it, as a description of what a good life is, how can we manage to lead a life on earth in which we and our communities are able to optimally flourish. That to me is what the Dharma is about. It's about human flourishing. It's not about the attainment of enlightenment. It's not about entering nirvana. It's not about even, realizing one's Buddha nature, whatever that might be. It's about how you and I and Phil and everybody else is able to come into their own potential as a human person in this short life, this unpredictable life. How can we become, the best possible version of ourselves is one way that this is phrased. And I understand the 4 tasks as really a fleshing out of what it means or what is required if we are to optimally become the kinds of people we aspire to be. And just to reiterate, perhaps in a slightly even more colloquial language than the one Phil used, this has to do, first of all, with embracing the condition we're in. It has to do with a fundamental honesty. It has to do with taking our life in all of its simplicity and banality seriously. It has to do with being able to say, yes, this is who I am, this is how I feel, this is what is going on in my body and my emotions and my feelings and my mind. How can I unconditionally say yes to that? And it's from that starting point that I can begin to notice how I react to whatever happens to me. In other words, I find myself in a situation, let's say with another person or in a business meeting with a colleague or whatever. I have initially to be able to say, yes, this is my reality right now. Whether I like it or not, that's beside the point. It's the capacity we have to be able to embrace the totality of where we find ourselves. And part of that totality, and this is the crucial bit in the Dharma, is to embrace your own reactions to the reality you're facing. And very often, not always, but very often, our reactions are, I like this, I want this. Or our reactions are, I really don't want to be here, I don't like this at all. Or reactions are, yeah, this is really boring. Or our reaction is, my God, she's attractive. Or my reaction is, I've got to make a good impression on these people. In other words, this is what we call the arising. This is the stuff that comes up. And the practice of the Dharma is to embrace that, to say, yes, that's what's coming up. It's okay. I've got these crazy thoughts going on in my mind. That's okay. That's simply what the encounter with this experience has prompted in this organism, and that's what's happening now. But it's not just something in which I have no power at all. I'm not just a machine that is driven by these inputs, not at all. And this, I think, if we're going to talk about Buddha nature, we can perhaps locate it here. It's the capacity I have to be able to say, I'm not going to follow that impulse. I'm not going to get caught up with making a good impression in this meeting. I'm not going to get drawn into fantasizing about this person I'm attracted to on the other side of the room. I'm just going to let that be. I'm not going to tamp it down and say it's bad and evil and it's sinful and it's going to get me into all kinds of suffering situations. No, I'm just going to say that's what's going on. And by letting it be, I'm acknowledging that when it's not reinforced by my desires or my fears, it'll just fizzle away of its own accord. It'll fade out. The nature of all fun. Huh?
You're anticipating a bit of where we're going to go in terms of psychedelics as well.
Oh,
because
okay.
In some way you're alluding to what I'm calling the feeling state of balance and the recognition of balance and the recognition of imbalance. And that there is a guide of some sort that we have to reinforce through some method, some way of saying we're in this world and we're going to conduct ourselves in the ways that keep us in balance and in connection being the necessary part of this as opposed to full individualism. And so you're anticipating that, but I wonder, as you talk about where Buddhism is in this, you've been working towards a fuller embrace, from my reading, of other traditions that also articulate ways of being in the world, self-recognition. It's almost a psychology, as you articulated it, and I'm fine with that, because I think it is a psychology, but it's a psychology that we're grounding in an ethical, connective path that has roots in deep parts of ourselves, but it's often violated. And how do we keep ourselves in some ways honest in our search for meaning, okay? So the Eightfold Path has been basically, as I've read you, the way in which we live our lives. And, I've played with trying to modernize that, and I hope you'll take that on and just put me in my place. But in a sense, aren't you deriving then a psychology that has some roots in Buddhism, but help us to locate that so that we have a sense of there's an extraction going on. I love the extraction, but what does it really have to do with Buddhism? We all know that life and death occurs. Ceasing is part of arising.
Well, I like the idea of balance. I mean, and I agree with you. That's kind of where I'm heading. The second task is to let these reactive patterns just be. The third task is to notice that you're not reacting.
Yeah.
The awareness of reactivity, the mindfulness we have of being reactive. The mindfulness is not reactive. The mindfulness is already in a state of balance. And what the Buddha called the state of balance was sometimes equanimity. But I think actually it's nirvana itself. Nirvana is the cooling down, the dying down, the stopping, temporarily or for longer, of reactive patterns. A non-reactive mind is a nirvanic mind. And that's part of the human legacy. It's not something you have to, you can only arrive at if you're a Buddhist. Buddhism provides one set of strategies and tools and philosophies and psychological insights that help us do this. But primarily, I would argue that this is an ethical process which draws on, I think, quite an astute psychological understanding of the human being. But the psychology is subservient to the ethics. In other words, the way I understand how the mind works is only really of any value from the Dharma point of view if it enables me to flourish more fully as a person. If it doesn't, I can be the world's greatest psychiatrist and psychologist and all these brilliant theories, but I may not actually have internalized or integrated much of this insight into how I actually live. And that's what really matters. And Buddhism, you ask, where does Buddhism come into this? I have more and more trouble actually, even with the word Buddhism. I think Buddhism is really shorthand for what we call one of the world religions. It's based upon the teachings of Gautama. It's been elaborated and developed over generations by very wise and caring people in India, in China, in Tibet, in Japan, and elsewhere. But Buddhism is very difficult not to fall into being a religion, a belief system, a structure of authority and power and hierarchy. And Buddhism is, the doctrine, belief in reincarnation, belief in the Four Noble Truths. These are all effectively metaphysical doctrines that the religion of Buddhism upholds and maintains and seeks to establish. I think we perhaps need to politely let go of Buddhism and recover the Dharma. And the Dharma is not a world religion. The Dharma is, it's central to what the Buddhist religion is talking about, but it's not the same thing at all.
What is Dharma in your terms?
Well, Dharma is one of these very difficult words that is very, very hard to define. But if I were to boil it down, you actually already alluded to it, these two grounds. When the Buddha, or the person who became the Buddha, describes his awakening, he says that he arrived at the Dharma, and the Dharma at which he arrived was twofold. On the one hand, it was nirvana. In other words, it was non-reactivity. And on the other hand, it was conditionality. In other words, the encounter with the sheer contingent unfolding of life itself. That is Dharma. And in combination with a capacity to be with that unfolding conditional life in such a way that we're not caught up in our reactive patterns, but are able to settle into a far more balanced relationship with life itself, such that we can respond to the situations in which we find ourselves, rather than to just mindlessly react, just to go along with habit, to go along with tradition, to go along with our own personal psychological baggage. To let go of that, or to let it be, and instead to find a capacity within us to embrace the conditional world in which we're part of, and to respond to it in an appropriate way from a non-reactive space of mind. That is the practice of the Dharma in a nutshell. I don't think we'll find it.
Just to try and help the situation, reactivity and reactive become key words in your looking at behavior and the human condition. And reactivity suggests, balance again, and some way in which we measure ourselves in a feeling state, because reactivity is a feeling, I think you'll agree. And that we are therefore, in modern neuroscience terms, kind of leaving the amygdala for the moment and trying to use the frontal lobes to reason. How would you deal with what the source uh, of handling reactivity is. It's an assessment, as you're defining it. It seems to me uh, a, a reality check on where I am moment to moment. Am I overreacting? What's really happening? It's really a rational process. Would you agree with that, or how would you? How would
No, I
you?
wouldn't. I mean, I agree that clearly it is a form of assessment. And that assessment has within it a rational component. It's our capacity as thinking beings to be able to identify what's coming up now. This is a reactive pattern. This is just going to go round and round in circles. That's the characteristic of
Sure.
reactivity, is that it's repetitive. It's a mistake to think that reactivity is the same as any reaction I might have to a situation. I can react to a situation with great generosity, with great love, with great wisdom, but I don't call that reactivity. Reactivity in my lexicon, and admittedly it's not a classical Buddhist term, it's one that I've in a sense concocted in order to unite a set of ideas in Buddhism, which are the notion of the arising, of what comes up, the notion of the three fires, greed, hatred, and delusion, which again, if you think about it, are what flare up, and the notion of tanha, or craving, that kind of deep-seated grasping and clinging both to self and to others, and to this sort of holding on, this desperate holding on. Now, reactivity is a way of talking about that complex of psychophysiological patterns that...
How do you think people know they're in such reactive positions?
Right. Well, that I think is again where the practice of meditation, for example, and the practice of just studying the Dharma allows us, a deeper and deeper insight and clarity as to what this is all about. That's why I'm a little reluctant to reduce it to something that is rational, entirely rational. It's just as much about attuning a certain quality of perception, of intuition, of feeling. I don't think of reactivity as feeling, really, although that's
But
probably...
it isn't from your point of view, tell me if I'm wrong, the Eightfold Path basically, as you put it, a pragmatic way of living in this
Yeah.
world. So it's a way of interacting. In a sense, it's the balance of human beings with each other, evoking the best that they can and suppressing the harm that they can do, because there are a set of references that say this is right speech. I don't like the word, but awakened speech. This is awakened practice of sexuality. There are references to where we cause harm, or where we have opportunity, or where we create goodness, and that becomes kind of the set of interaction. So, in a sense, there's a social revolutionary aspect to the to all of this, which says not just behave yourself, but I am aware that my behavior is effective on everyone else as well as me. And it's like my Indra's jewel idea that, you illuminate me as you're doing right now. And my internal illumination grows. And in the reciprocity of being in the jewel state with you, hopefully something good happens to you from all this. And that we spread that we're all interconnected. And it's the interconnection that seems to me to be the force form of what is the motive behind behavior and how we register it. It's social and embedded in nature. Otherwise, it's solipsistic.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's kind of, in a sense, assumed. It's not, the interconnectivity is, interestingly, not a term the Buddha uses that much, but it's clearly implied in everything that the four tasks are involved in. And particularly, once we get into this state of balance, let's say, this state of non-reactivity, this nirvanic space, that's not the end of the process at all. That's actually just where it begins. The Eightfold Path, this way of life, of human flourishing that covers all aspects of our existence, originates from the experience of nirvana. It originates from our recognizing that we do not have to lead our lives driven by these personal and social and political forces that are driving us, but we can step back, we can find within ourselves a stillness, a clarity that we recognize rationally, but most crucially, that we experience somatically. And that's where it ceases to be just something rational. If you haven't got this somatic integration, in other words, if you don't embody these qualities of non-reactivity, then they're never really going to get a very good purchase on how you subsequently then respond to the world in which you find yourself. So the Eightfold Path outlines a way of life that is founded on a source of non-reactive awareness. And as you look at the Eightfold Path, it starts with vision, it moves into imagination, and then immediately you're into speech, you're into work, you're into livelihood. You're already engaging with other beings. You're no longer alone. The Eightfold Path cannot be intelligible unless it is social, unless it is an aspect of our interactive relationships with other beings, not just humans, but animals and all other forms of life. And so later Buddhism has sort of spelled that out and has talked of how we're all interconnected and so on. But to me, that's also already at a certain level of abstraction and metaphysics. And I rather like the fact that the Gautama does not tend to use that sort of language. He's concerned with how we do it, with how we live in a non-reactive way, that how we can cultivate our vision, our imagination, how we can find our own voice, how we can flourish in our work, how we can sustain life of our families, of our communities, of all beings. It's an integral, the four tasks as we describe them are really a framework that describes how we can best care for ourselves, for others, for the world, and we would extend this now to the environment, the climate, the planet, everything. And
in some ways, don't you think it's a kind of a utopian vision in the face of dystopian life, in the face of the basic state? I mean utopian in the best sense, because I'm a utopian. All my life I've been devoted to, seeing how community can flourish, how we can be together, and with all the difficulties that we have of collaboration. And the Eightfold Path and what you're describing is, in a sense, how we would like to live if we could create such a community. I mean, it's not terribly far from, to each according to their abilities, to each according to their needs, which is, a utopian format as well. But it's not utopian in the sense that it's far from what we really long for as a way of life. It's embedded in us.
That's right. Well, I'd probably not use the word utopian, but I would certainly acknowledge that this is this is somewhat idealistic. But any kind of life philosophy that claims that through following it, by practicing it, one will increase one's chances of leading a rich and fulfilling life is in some respects idealistic, particularly when it's presented on paper, or when it's presented in a talk like here in terms of ideas. But the rubber hits the road, I think is the expression you use in the United States, when this ideology of the Eightfold Path has to actually impact with the messiness of the world. And one of the things that I feel displays the Buddha's genius particularly well is that he always brings you back to dukkha. That dukkha is an inescapable component of what it means to be alive. And I think Buddhism gets it entirely wrong when it talks of the path as being about the ending of dukkha. That I don't buy anymore.
No.
It's about the ending of reactivity, really.
Which is, in some ways, that's what people call double dukkha. I was going to write a thing called duking it out with double dukkha. In a way, it's just that point of change. Dukkha is inevitable, but how we put suffering on suffering is not inevitable. It's the point of
well, that is, I mean, this is a very popular idea. It's called the second arrow.
Yes.
And I think it's psychologically very true. I mean, it's undeniable, but I don't think it's terribly profound. I think any psychologist who's worth their salt would recognize it immediately.
That is the heart of psychotherapy, is double.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm a little perplexed why that is made into such a big deal in Buddhism. I think you're actually taking one of the Buddha's psychological insights and elevating it to a greater importance than it merits, frankly.
Right.
To me, the point of the Dharma, the point of all of these practices, is not to eliminate dukkha, although that would be a wonderful thing, but it's to actually, it is actually to find a way of living your life to its full. And living one's life to its full means embracing suffering. The first task is to embrace suffering. Yeah. And that means to be able to say yes to all of the pain, and not just the additional pain that I unnecessarily layer onto my physical pain, but all suffering, all pain. To me, that is the alpha and the omega of the Dharma, is to be able to say yes to the suffering of life, and not to think of it as something that we can somehow dispense with. Without suffering, I think there is no life. And the idea that you can get to a point where you don't have any pain, any worries, any anxieties, any discomforts, you're just living in this blissed out state, I think that is utopian. And I don't think
I think that's cryosurgery. It's not even utopian.
Yeah, if you could probably lobotomize somebody to get them into a state like that.
Yeah.
And there may be some people who are born in this kind of sort of, this benign, ideal.
Have you ever met anyone?
No, I haven't, and I doubt I ever will. But again, I think it's missing the point. I think this whole business of getting rid of suffering is in line with the whole Indian religious tradition, which sees us, life is about freeing yourself from rebirth, which is basically freeing yourself from suffering.
Yeah.
If you're going to get reborn, if you're going to find yourself back in a womb, if you're going to be on earth with a body, you're going to suffer. It goes with the territory. And it's arguably utterly indispensable to any possibility of human development or growth, is to be able to work with your suffering. And we will hopefully have moments in which we feel happy, in which we experience great sense of meaningfulness, of fulfillment, of joy, with the understanding that these things are ephemeral. They'll come, they'll go. The idea of a permanent state of well-being, I think, is a chimera. I think it's a pipe dream. So
that's a great place for us to turn a little bit towards the nirvana of psychedelics and all of that, because in a sense, what you're standing on its head is that whole Hinayana kind of idea of nirvana as being a permanent state, that we achieve Buddhahood and we're forever moved into the land of some extraordinary place where the angels are singing in their Buddhist songs, and that we can achieve that and hold that and be in that. And that's certainly been a human aspiration and remains a human aspiration, that we can be permanently exalted, permanently freed of want and caring, cruelty, and live in a state of exaltation. And, you know, I agree with you. I think it's temporary. And so lately and this is a wonderful new little book. I want to show it, The Art of Solitude. You know, I've known you a little bit for a few decades. And you always knew I was a kind of psychedelic guy in my way. And yet you were very unrevealing of your own past history, which I respect. And yet now you've opened up and you've been writing a bit about exploration with ayahuasca, I think mushrooms and other things, and you've opened the doors to your past, and it's so welcome. And I would like to hear more about your sense of, sometimes I don't think you're that happy with it. You don't think it's that great. And a lot of it's difficult. Certainly I've had my difficulties, but it seems to have become part of your exploration of being, or always was, and we didn't know about it. So maybe we could talk about the temporary nirvanas of, or the partial nirvanas, or the terrible suffering of psychedelic medicine.
Yeah, well, I think like many of my generation who got into the Dharma, into Buddhism and Hinduism and Taoism and so on, in the late 60s, early 70s, we came out of the subculture, which very much celebrated the use of mind-altering substances, particularly LSD. And I'm not alone in having had experiences as a young person, when I was like 17, 18 years old, by taking LSD, probably in very, very inappropriate situations, and God knows what I was actually putting in my body. But nonetheless, it led to experiences that made me realize that there's more to life than I was led to believe in middle-class England. That consciousness and others, how we can be the kind of beings we are, is completely radicalized when you are under the influence of a couple of hundred micrograms of LSD. And with the supportive culture of the 60s, I don't think again, the setting is just as crucial as the substance. But that cultural moment, I think, was significant precisely because it enabled us to hold experiences like those of LSD in a way that didn't just get us freaked out and you know, worried or frightened, but actually could be used to look more deeply into the sorts of beings we are, to question ourselves more deeply. But I think for myself, more than anything else, to be radically astonished by the fact of being here at all. And LSD, in my case, was really a revelation in opening up the world in a way that I previously could never have imagined it to be. Now, of course, as we all know, that doesn't last forever. It lasts for a few hours. And you may take it the next time and you have the opposite. You have a horrible experience, or it doesn't really have any meaning for you at all. But I think for many of us, it opened the doors of perception, as they say, and coupled with an interest in non-Western forms of religion, particularly Buddhism and Hinduism, it led us to say, this is where I'm going to pursue this. A key for myself, and again for many others, was the publication of Be Here Now by Ram Dass. Well, I got hold of a very early copy of that in probably 1970, 1971. And that then was the bridge between psychedelic experience and the experience of Buddhist and Hindu mystical practices. And probably it was all those factors together that led me to hitchhike overland to India in 1972 and to settle in Dharamsala with the Dalai Lama and his followers, and to begin my training and practice of the Dharma, which has continued until today. So I'm clearly indebted to those psychedelic experiences for what subsequently unfolded in my life. But once I got involved in Buddhism, I didn't take psychedelics again. And I kind of just left it behind. And this is, again, another sort of trope I've noticed with my generation, is that we have this standard statement, oh yes, I took that when I was a teenager and it was very helpful. I learned a lot of stuff, but now I've left it behind and have gone on to higher things.
It goes further. I don't even need that.
I don't even need that stuff anymore. Yeah, exactly. Now, it's done its job. It was all very nice, but it's dangerous. Don't touch it. But, you know, it can help.
Or meditation takes me as far as any.
Yeah, exactly. That's the other line. And I think I promoted that line for an awful long time myself. But when I got to be 65, was it 60? I think it might have been 60, can't remember now. I think when I got to be 60, that's right. I decided I wanted to take stock of my life afresh. So I took a year off. And one of the things I wanted to do was to revisit psychedelic experiences, not by taking a pill in my living room, but by joining in shamanic ceremonies with ayahuasca and peyote. So my first experience of peyote was in Mexico in 2013, I think. And I arranged to meet with a shaman, to be part of a small medicine circle, and we took freshly cut and ground peyote cactus, and that was an incredible experience. It wasn't just about returning to what I had experienced as a young person. In fact, it wasn't really much that at all. It was an extraordinary confirmation of what I'd done with my life. And at the same time, I also experienced it as a purification. And it allowed me to experience states of mind that I don't find I get through meditation, to be perfectly honest. I'm not interested in all of the psychedelic sort of swirly colors and all that kind of stuff. That doesn't interest me at all. In fact, I find that gets in the way. But what I was very struck by in this ceremony with peyote is it brought me into an incredible state of stillness and depth and clarity, luminosity of mind, that was very, very centered and stayed with me for some weeks after the actual experience. In other words, after the actual effect of the alkaloid had worn off. It was a remarkably meaningful experience on many, many, many levels. And this led me a couple of years later to participate in 2 ayahuasca ceremonies, a year apart, this time in Europe with European shamans. And again, I had a very meaningful and deep experience in which I felt that, again, I had been purged of something. This was a feature, with the peyote, I didn't experience any vomiting or anything like that. It was very, very clean. With ayahuasca, there was lots of purging, of vomiting. Although I'd been on, followed diets beforehand and so on. And I feel that the purging was a very central part of the ceremony itself. It wasn't just an unpleasant side effect. And it was more than just purging whatever happened to be in my stomach. It was about purging something much deeper than that.
Well, didn't you find, as most of us do, that as you come into the purge, there's a blossoming of the ayahuasca effect to another level of height that's so motoric and so profound and goes so deep. So while you're in this, you're engulfed in misery, you're also engulfed in this extraordinary explosion of light and color and Mandelbrot's and all the rest of that.
Well, actually, that's what I didn't do. What I found was quite different to that. I found that yes, the purging brought the ayahuasca experience to another level of depth, but I also found that the purging purged all of the Mandelbrot's patterns and fractals and all of the psychedelic jiggery pokery. That was purged too. It led
Some
me
of us
into.
like that. Some of us like that. Don't
Yeah,
put
I know
it.
some of you like that, but I'm just, for the record, telling you I find it's like psychedelic prapancha, basically. It's just sort of colourful mental chatter. It's not my thing. Let's put it that way.
Oh,
But I found that the purging rid me of all of that, all of those visuals, as it were. And once again, like with the peyote, brought me into a very still and deep and clear space of awareness in which I was able to contemplate my existence, my being, my consciousness at a level of depth that I've not been able to access in meditation. Um, uh, and again, I think that these experiences wouldn't have been what they were had they not been held by the group, had they not been held by the shaman, had they not been punctuated by with songs, with
so
the.
are you not tempted to try it on your own?
No, actually, I'm not. The only thing I tried on my own recently was last year. Someone gave me some mushrooms that they'd found in Dartmoor, and I did that by myself, and that was actually a very amazing experience. But no, I'm very. If I were to take ayahuasca again, and I might actually, I've been invited to a ceremony in a few months' time, and I might go to that. No, I found that the collective experience was very, very
No, I
important.
agree.
And the silence of the group, but particularly the songs of the shaman. What do they call them? The medicine songs, Akiro or
Ikaros.
Ikaro.
You
The
also,
Ikaro.
you also stopped drinking. You wrote about.
Yes, that was. You see, two things happened. I took ayahuasca twice, a year apart. After the first ayahuasca experience, when I was in the sort of the 2 or 3 days following it, also maintaining the same diet, I realized my body wasn't going to drink alcohol again. That hadn't been my motive at all.
Your body wasn't going to drink alcohol again. What about
No.
your mind? Was that going to drink alcohol?
Well, my mind was sort of the curious thing. I live in Bordeaux. There's very good wine here. It's cheap. It's available, and I like it. I must be one of the few Buddhist teachers who has a wine cellar. So drinking wine was one of the things I really enjoyed a great deal.
Amkai Norbu loved wine.
Well, a lot of Tibetans.
A lot of Tibetans like
but,
wine.
But others, I also discovered that despite my liking of wine, it was habit forming. I was becoming addicted to it. And I was every day, every evening, I would have to have about half a bottle of wine. I wasn't getting totally plastered, but I definitely was, it was very much a habit of my life. And after that our first ayahuasca experience, I knew I wouldn't drink again. We just stopped. And the curious thing, I remember sometimes my mind, on seeing a nice bottle of Bordeaux red, would go, oh yeah, I'd like some of that. But my body didn't follow through. There was that sort of tug of, yeah, in the stomach that would normally follow the thought.
Stephen, you're embracing mind-body dualism in a terrible way.
However you describe it, this is basically what it felt like. In other words, but what I found interesting was that what the ayahuasca didn't, as it were, delete the mental habit.
Yeah.
It somehow touched into the very root of my physiological addiction, if that's what it was, or my physiological desire, if you want. And that was now nearly 4 years ago. And I haven't had a drop of wine, beer, whiskey, anything since. And I don't fantasize about it. I don't miss it at all. I'm really glad it's out of my life. And so in that to me was one of the most extraordinary experiences of the of ayahuasca, because it wasn't I didn't go there to, confront my alcohol drinking at all, at least not consciously. Maybe there was a part of me that was doing that, I don't know. But the point is, it actually freed me from something that I think was very dangerous and harmful. I've saved my liver, probably the equivalent of 1,000 or more bottles of wine. I'm sure it's probably good for the liver. The second ayahuasca experience also had to do with ridding myself of an attachment. But this time, what I purged was not an attachment to alcohol. It was an attachment to Buddhism. And this, again, had a very, very forceful impact on me. It made me realize that I was addicted to Buddhism. I'd spent my whole adult life studying, practicing, teaching Buddhism. I self-identified very enthusiastically as a Buddhist. I got into all kinds of debates and arguments and struggles with Buddhists who didn't agree with what I was saying. And I fought my corner as best I could. I was engaged in the Dharma wars, and I took it all terribly seriously. But what ayahuasca showed me was that's just another addiction, just another attachment.
Well, did you go through a withdrawal? I mean,
no, I didn't go through withdrawal. I had no withdrawal from alcohol.
No,
although basically I stopped dead.
I meant, was there a withdrawal syndrome from Buddhism? No one's really described that too well. People throw off their robes. Trungpa throws off his robes and becomes a sexual maniac, alcoholic, etc. We have all the stories of people having withdrawals from Buddhism. But I wonder what you had, if any.
Again, I didn't experience, that's not the language that I would use. I didn't experience any sense of withdrawal. What I did experience was a sense of liberation, a sense of freedom, a sense of no longer being bound or tied to Buddhism. And that was really about freedom of mind. And as a consequence, as I've already mentioned earlier in this discussion, I'm not particularly happy identifying as a Buddhist anymore, because whether I like it or not, Buddhists are going to perpetuate Buddhist beliefs and Buddhist traditions and Buddhist hierarchies, most of which were formulated in Asia over the last 1,000 or 2,000 years. And I don't think that's got a place in our world today. At least not for...
Another one along those lines. So what then are you doing about secular Buddhism, where you have a followership and we have people meeting as secular Buddhists, coming together for secular Buddhist experiences? What are you going to do?
Well, what I'm doing with that is I don't call it secular Buddhism anymore. I call it secular Dharma. I've stopped using the expression secular Buddhism or secular Buddhist, although I know many of my followers do. But I'm quite serious here. I think that what I'm interested in is not secular Buddhism, because I think Buddhism is kind of beyond reform. We don't need all that baggage any longer. What we need, I think, is a recovery of the Dharma. And to that degree, I think that Buddhism often gets in the way of practicing the Dharma. So secular Dharma, yes, but at some point, I'd like to be able to drop the word secular too. I don't think it's in the end going to...
It's kind of an ugly word. It's not...
Well, it's a word that speaks to people, some people. And I found it helpful. Many people find it helpful, but it's not a word of which I'm particularly enamored.
No, you never said you were.
So in some ways, I think this is I would like to think that my trajectory is actually going to culminate in a recovery of the Dharma and a practice of the Dharma. And maybe that word can be dropped as well. That's another piece of jargon. People say, what does it mean? Or you just asked me what it meant, and I can give you a kind of clever definition. But in some ways, I think we have to leave all of that behind and internalize the Dharma, whatever that is, internalize Buddhism to the point that we can find our own voice And this brings us back to the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path speaks of right speech. Again, it's moralistic. It's a right speech,
I
wrong speech.
translated that. You never accepted my translated
Well, you
to
said awakened, right?
awakened. Yeah.
Well, I actually think we can just drop the adjective. The Dharma is the practice of the path, the Eightfold Path, part of which concerns how we speak, how we give voice, how we communicate. And I take it for granted that if this is a practice of ethics and flourishing, then I'm going to find out how can I communicate and speak and give voice to things in a way that helps me flourish. I don't want to belabor myself with the ideas that this is the right way or the awakened way or the complete way. We don't need that. It's not necessary. It's an unnecessary.
Well, in that sense, then, if we abandon all of that, aren't we really talking about an ecology of planetary and human connection and behavior in which cooperation and do no harm flourish, in which
Yeah,
sharing love,
you could put it that way.
connection. I mean, it
Yes.
becomes that kind of recognition of interconnection, and what are the best ways in which we can connect for our own benefit and enlightenment and for the benefit of all beings. Isn't that really where we come down to?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there's a bit of a problem for me with that, and that is that I'm not really interested in a grand synthesis of all of these wonderful traditions.
Too bad.
I do feel that what Gautama saw and what he articulated and how he lived has something very distinctive to teach us today. And I don't want to dissolve that into a kind of a great sort of synthetic mix of all different, bit of shamanism, bit of yoga, bit of tantra, blah blah blah.
No, I don't think it's technical. I agree with that. I think it's humane. I think it's about the best capacities. It's about the nirvana of everyday life in a way.
Yeah, that is I mean, I think the word nirvana is one that will survive. I can't think of an alternative, and very probably the word dharma too. What I'm writing now, I'm not using the word Buddhism, but I am using the word dharma quite centrally, and the word nirvana. I'm not translating either, but they're about the only two terms that have survived the cull, if you want, dharma and nirvana, which I think of as synonyms, actually. That's how the Buddha saw it. He said nirvana is clearly visible, immediate, inviting.
It's joyful,
effective.
It's pleasure. I've always argued that if Buddhism is oppressive in its nature and doesn't court pleasure, the pleasure of connection, the pleasure of learning, of exaltation, we don't court pleasure, why do it? No one's going to want to do it anyway, right? It has to be aligned with some sense of joy and happiness and flourishing.
Flourishing is the word that works for me. But again, it's a translation of eudaimonia, which again means happiness.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
That's how the Greeks is one dimension of what it means. But I'm not terribly drawn to the happiness culture. That pervaded Buddhism for a period some years ago.
I hate to leave us on a vulgar note, so we won't be drawn to the happiness notion. But
it's really about how do I live this life to the full, in such a way that I optimize my own capacities, both as an individual human being and also as a social animal, as a person who is embedded and connected not just to other humans but to all forms of life, animate, organic, worldwide. And that, I think, is our great koan of today, is planet Earth as seen from space. That is the question. How do we somehow ensure that life that has flourished on this planet will continue to do so. That is the question.
We don't want to be on Mars with Elon Musk and Richard Branson looking down and saying, what can we extract from Mars to bring back?
No. That doesn't make it.
We're not looking at that kind of thing. We're looking at vision of planetary existence in the most flourishing way, in which we have so much work to do to even bring back any possibility of that. So
that's right. That's right. Yeah. So that's where we're going. And in the recent issue of Tricycle, I published an essay called "Embracing Extinction." I don't know whether you've seen it, but that's the first time I've actually bitten the bullet and addressed, these social, environmental, political issues, which I've done somewhat sort of philosophically. But I do feel that, one can no longer sit on the fence here. That we are facing an impending catastrophe. And I don't mean the next the prospect of the next 4 years of your government, but the world itself. And this is of enormous urgency, and it's far more important than the survival of what we call Buddhism.
Agreed. But we have to come to an end.
Shame.
No, it's been lovely. I would invite you to partake of ketamine once we see you again up close. It's an extraordinary, much less prolonged experience, but an extraordinary time out. And
well, again, I've no experience of ketamine.
I know,
but I would put myself under your capable care.
I deserve your trust. I do indeed. So it's been wonderful to be with you as always.
Thank you.
I wish you very well, and I will be happy to give you this recording also for your use. And just thank you so much for your erudition, your work, your being, for everything. You've been a great teacher.
Okay. Thank you so much, Phil. And thanks everyone who has listened to this, wherever you are, whoever you are. And if you want to explore further my journeys through psychedelics with ayahuasca and peyote, this is the book.
It's a good book. I've read it. It's a good book. There's a little bit too much Montaigne in it. That's the only part I had trouble with.
Well, everybody's got their own favorite section.
It's a really lovely book.
Okay then, keep well.
Take care.
Bye-bye.